liberty may be endangered by the abuse of liberty, but also by the abuse of power. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If tyranny and oppression come to this land, it will be in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy. Philosophy is common sense with big words. The circulation of confidence is better than the circulation of money. Wherever there is interest and power to do wrong, wrong will generally be done. A well-instructed people alone can be permanently a free people. Religion flourishes in greater purity, without than with the aid of government. The capacity of the female mind for studies of the highest order cannot be doubted, having been sufficiently illustrated by its works of genius, of erudition, and of science. Each generation should be made to bear the burden of its own wars, instead of carrying them on, at the expense of other generations. To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people, is a chimerical idea. The internal effects of immutable policy poisons the blessings of liberty itself. Let me recommend the best medicine in the world, a long journey, at a mild season, through a pleasant country, in easy stages. It will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. As long as the reason of man continues fallible, and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. Where an excessive power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. No man is safe in his opinions, his person, his faculties, or his possessions. The operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger, those of the state governments, in times of peace and security. The happy union of these states is a wonder, their constitution a miracle, their example the hope of liberty throughout the world. The class of citizens who provide at once their own food and their own raiment, may be viewed as the most truly independent and happy. I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Equal laws protecting equal rights. The best guarantee of loyalty and love of country. The censorial power is in the people over the government, and not in the government over the people. If we are to be one nation in any respect, it clearly ought to be in respect to other nations. Despotism can only exist in darkness, and there are too many lights now in the political firmament, to permit it to remain anywhere, as it has heretofore done, almost everywhere. Where we see the same faults followed regularly by the same misfortunes, we may reasonably think that if we could have known the first we might have avoided the others. The presidency alone unites the conjectures of the public. We should never think of separation except for repeated and enormous violations. But what is government itself, but the greatest of all reflection on human nature? Experience is the oracle of truth. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Religious bondage shackles and debilitates the mind, and unfits it for every noble enterprise, every expanded prospect. Letter to William Bradford, Jr. April 1, 1774. History records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance. The Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, where the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. Americans have the right and advantage of being armed, unlike the citizens of other countries whose governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. Charity is no part of the legislative duty of the government. I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which granted a right to Congress of expending, on objects of benevolence, the money of their constituents. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors, must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives. Learned institutions ought to be favored objects with every free people. They throw that light over the public mind which is the best security against crafty and dangerous encroachments on the public liberty.